So hello from Algeria, Rwanda, Mauritius, Mauritius as well, Algeria, Eswatini, Benin, Mozambique, South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Eswatini. Wow, it's amazing. Madagascar, Algeria, Uganda, South Africa, Botswana. Yay! That's amazing. We can see, this dynamic. Sierra Leone, Malawi. Yeah, that's amazing. Morocco, Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, Sudan. Can you see the chat in Chimonia? It's a really active.
It's a super active chat. It's so exciting that there's so many people here. How many people are in the school, in the academy for this week, or for these couple of days?
So we have received over 2,800 applications, and we have selected 500 participants. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I will leave absolutely the floor to our amazing moderator, Chimonia. And yeah, so guys, I hope you enjoyed the panel. And most importantly, I want you really to learn as much as possible, to put what you're going to learn in practice, because as I said, it's good to discuss, very important to give recommendations, but what our continent needs right now is action. So we are counting on you. Africa is counting on all of us. And yeah, enjoy this session. I give the floor to Inchimunia.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hatim. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it's such a pleasure to meet all of you and to be speaking to you guys all today. So as Hatim mentioned, my name is Nchimunya Hamukoma, and I am an economist and policy strategist based in South Africa. And yeah, this morning I will be moderating our session on the overview of challenges and opportunities in Africa. And I think, like the first place that I was like, when I got this topic, I was like, that is a really big topic. And that's definitely something that we could talk about for hours or for days or even for years. So I thought a really good way for us to try and ground it would be for us to look at the aspirations, at the 7 aspirations of the 2063 agenda. So I'm going to try and share my screen with you guys now and show you what those aspirations are. And if you can't see my screen, I'll also read them out loud so that we can all start on the same baseline footing in terms of the ways that we're thinking about some challenges and development issues. Let me just share it. Okay, cool. Please let me know if, I guess in the comments, if you guys can see the screen that I'm sharing at the moment. And so the first aspiration is for a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Number 2 is an integrated continent, politically united and based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision for Africa's renaissance. Number 3 is an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Number 4 is a peaceful and secure Africa. Number 5 is an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, shared values, and ethics. And number 6 is an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth, and caring for children. And number 7 is an Africa as strong, united, resilient, and influential global player and partner. So today, as we think about the challenges, these are the 7 challenges that we'll be thinking through. This is also, this infographic is also available on the Atlas for Development website, so you can also find it there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see more of what's happening in the chats and come back to you guys. Okay. And so, yeah, those are the 7 issues that will kind of base our discussion and that our esteemed panelists are going to take us through. Our discussion today is going to be using the Talanoa dialogue method. So we're going to be asking 3 really big meeting questions. Number 1 is, where are we? Number 2, where do we want to go? And number 3, how do we want to get there? And so that discussion is going to happen for the first sort of 35 to 40 minutes amongst the panelists. And then we're going to open up the conversation afterwards into a more open discussion with everybody in the audience. So maybe I see that there's a Q&A box. So maybe if you have specific questions, the Q&A box might be a good place to put them in as we go through the discussion. And I'll try to pick up as many as we go along. And then it comes to our esteemed panelists. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining today. Because the bios are available online, I'm not going to be doing a really deep dive into each panelist's biography. But what I am going to do is to ask each of the panelists as I introduce them, if they could please share which of those aspirations resonates for them most deeply with their experience, with their career experience and their personal experience as well. And also, what's the one thing that you'd like our audience members to know about you as we start the conversation? So I'm going to start off with Ms. Lilia Nas Hashem. Welcome, and please let us know about you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Chimonia. Thank you very much for the organizers to have made me part of this important event and 2063 Academy to give a little contribution, I would say. As you know from my profile, I work for the International Trade Center, and as part of my career, I was also working with the Economic Commission for Africa. So the three aspirations really that speak to me, even though all of them are important and all of them are interlinked, I have to say. So it's very difficult to separate, but the three that speak to me are aspiration 1, prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth, aspiration 2, an integrated continent, and aspiration 7, Africa as a strong, united, resilient, and influential global partner. I think these three speak to me because they, I think trade can be an engine and a driver to make these aspirations, to achieve these aspirations and make them concrete over the years. I think your second question was to talk about the current challenges, is it?
So we're going to get to the challenges shortly, but I wanted to find out if there was one thing that you'd like the audience to know about you today before we start really getting in.
Wow. The one thing I'm a strong believer in the African continent. I am personally from Tunisia, the highest point in Africa, I can say. Northwise, of course, towards the north. And I am a strong believer that it is the time for Africa, and it is the time where Africa can really achieve its own development, its own integration, and its own prosperity. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's so exciting. I will go on next then to Dr. Fatima Diur. Please, I apologize for my sub-Saharan African pronunciation, so please share with us how we can say your name in the best way possible. And it's the same questions that I had before from Ms. Nas.
Yeah, thank you. Is to present myself. This was the question, yeah. And can you please repeat the question?
Sure. So the questions are which of the aspirations resonates with you and really clicks with you? And then also, what's one thing that you'd like the audience to know about you today?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So my name is Fatima Driwesh. I am Associate Professor at the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. And I was working for a long time at the Moroccan Med Service. And they have international activities around climate and climate change and also climate services. So we will talk about this through the Aspiration 7, and especially one of the priorities of this Aspiration 7, which consists of climate resilience and natural disasters preparedness and prevention. So I would like to talk about this within the Aspiration 7. And yeah, I'm happy to talk about. I don't know if we should talk now or after the round table.
After this, I think at the moment we're just going to be introducing each other and getting to know everybody. And then when it comes to where we are, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about climate resilience. I'm also excited that there's so many women on the panel today. That's such a lovely kind of panel to be on. And so next I'd like to introduce Ms. Halimatu Hima. Please go ahead and share.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hamukoma. As the panelist, the moderator mentioned, I'm Halimatu from Niger, currently working at the permanent mission of Niger to the UN as part of the Security Council team. I think for me, really, as Ms. Lilia Naz had said, all of these aspirations are interconnected. But if I would have to narrow down to three that really speak to me, I would say first and foremost, it's aspiration 6, the one that focuses on human capital. And why is that? Because I believe, and many studies have shown that, you know the factor, without people, you cannot do much. And human capital is the most important resource that our African countries have. And we'd have to say that Africa is a young continent. And because of that, investing in human capital becomes even the more important. The second one I would have to say is aspiration 4, which is peaceful and secure Africa. And this I say particularly as a young woman from the Sahel region, where we see a series of security concerns facing our region, as well as other parts of Africa. And we've been talking about silencing the guns on our continent for so long, but sadly, the guns are still speaking. And we know that without security, there can be no development. So for me, security is paramount. It's critical. So which is why I would say number 4 as well. And the last 2, if I can cheat a little, I would say 2 and 1. 2, because Africa must come together to really grow, to thrive. And we can see that happening slowly but surely, actually a little fast. It is happening. We can see it on this panel today. And first, and the last one is the aspiration 1 on inclusive growth. We cannot have a small minority running and leaving the majority behind. So growth has to be inclusive. And development has to take into account sustainability issues. I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, it's looking like we're going to have such an exciting conversation today as we get more into it. Perfect. And thank you. And Mr. Preset, please do.
My name is Cyril Preset, and I actually had to step in for my colleague, Mr. Thomas Gass, ambassador for the Swiss Cooperation Agency, SDC. And so I'm very pleased to speak on his behalf and on behalf of SDC today. So jumping in straight into the aspirations before we talk to the more broad challenges, I would say personally, I think I will be very inspired also by, all obviously as the other panelists have mentioned are definitely connected, interlinked. But I would definitely say that aspiration 3, in terms of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice and the rule of law, and certainly aspiration 4 are paramount. The reason is that there cannot be social and economic development without good governance and democracy. Let's be very frank. These are the two sides of the medal. And I feel like as much as we want to stress out the importance of economic developments, they're just going hand in hand. So I think for me, this is what I would say. And certainly perhaps also look at the aspiration 6, because I believe that any development needs to be people-centered and youth and women-centered. So in that front, I think that's exactly where I would probably put the focus and ensure that those aspirations, obviously we want all of them to be met, but I think I would definitely certainly support aspiration 6 in this regard. So yes, I think these are definitely inspiring aspirations, so to speak, and I'm happy that we'll have this conversation and exchange. And I'm happy also to provide perhaps shed some lights on what is actually, as an example, SDC has been doing in Africa, particularly in the field of education and training. And I'll stop it here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your insights on these exciting aspirations and these exciting goals. I think particularly in the context of 2020, which has been a year that has just completely shifted any of the things that we thought were possible to happen in a year, or even the things in terms of like how we travel, how we exist, or just how the world functions has been so fundamentally changed in this year. I think it's good for us to always be able to look back and to look at the aspirations and the goals of where we'd like to see ourselves going forward. And also I think to kind of use those to kind of ground us in the context of where are we now? And I guess, and that is, I guess, the first question of the Talanoa method is like, where are we now? What are some of the challenges that we can see on the continent at the moment that are changing the art of what is possible and that will be key levers in influencing what's going to happen in the future? So I think I will try to change up my order of calling on you. Can we have Ms. Hima to go first?
Sure, I'm happy to go first. I think where we are is that we are at a very critical juncture today, not only as a continent, but as a global community. We're faced with a global pandemic with severe social and economic consequences worldwide. And for me, looking at this, it's clear that we need to be more agile about how we think about not only the present, but also the future. Which is why, honestly, when I look at Agenda 2063, as a young African who has read history, I am so proud to have an agenda that is Africa-led and that it speaks to the aspirations of Africans. I think it is really, really important. Like I said earlier, I think human capital is by far the most important resource to move our continent forward. So I think first, mostly when we look at our continent, it's characterized by high population growth. And the population that is fully equipped could allow our African countries to harness, for example, the benefits of the demographic dividend. And it could be a spectacular engine for growth and for reduction in poverty. We have seen that happen in Asian countries, for example. But for this to happen, this education has to be of quality. It is critical that it be so. Because I think we look at the continent, some of my work has been in research, and it has been shown that there's been an expansion in access to schooling in most African countries, including in rural areas. And I can see that even in my country here in Niger. However, studies also show that the learning outcomes are extremely low. So for example, children in African countries face much lower learning outcomes and higher dropout rates than children in other parts of the world. And this really has to change. I think we cannot conceive of a continent that is connected to the rest of the world, where our population, which is mostly young, is not fully equipped to face up to the challenges that this century presents us with. And the other thing, I don't know if this is still in the where we are part, is that poor investment in human capital can really have severe consequences, especially in a continent like ours with so many fragilities. And unfortunately, it must be said, if untapped, a large youth population can also be a hotbed for social discontent, for turmoil, and even conflict. So the question of access to education, I would link it to aspiration is also a question of peace and security. So for me, where we are is that we have a continent that is extremely rich in that we have a young population. We have a continent that is rich with human and also natural resources. But where we are also is that we really need to think differently about how we invest in human capital and how we invest in education as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's such an important point. The people are the engine of growth and are even, I think, ultimately are the ultimate beneficiaries of growth. I think there has definitely been this imagination of economic growth and development as something that exists outside of the people who will be benefiting and whose lives will be improving from it. So it's really important to have that as a fundamental factor, that the people are where we need to put our investment and where we need to thoughtfully engage. Dr. Drioch, what do you think about where we are, especially now with climate issues?
Okay, thank you. So I'm not sure if my intervention fits exactly into this session, but I will try, because in all cases, climate change is a challenge for Africa, and not only for Africa, but for all the world. So as I have said, my interventions is within the Aspiration 7, which consists of Africa as a strong, united, resilient, and influential global player and partner. And especially, I will talk, especially we talk about the climate resilience and natural disaster preparedness and prevention. So where we are, so based on several studies, including IPCC reports, the most known reports on climate change, high-profile reports, natural and managed ecosystems and socio-economic systems in Africa demonstrated already important vulnerabilities and are already being affected by climate change. And also, where we are going is that climate-related risk would be exacerbated in the future if the appropriate actions are not taken in the right time. In particular, climate change is amplifying stress on water, and Africa, several regions in Africa, several parts of Africa are already water stressed. So climate change is amplifying stress on water availability. And if we have stress, water stress, we can imagine what would be the impacts on development, on sustainability, on the economic system, on health, on young, on women, etc., etc. So, and the impacts of climate change will be superimposed onto already water stressed catchments with complex land uses. It is important. Land use is important. Good managed land use is important and required. And also this stress and impacts will be superimposed with other non-climate stressors. And as we know, to limit these risks, we need to limit these risks now, before the future. And we need to bolster resilient development. It is important to increase awareness about the climate change challenge within all the populations, all kinds of people. So we need more awareness about climate change challenge and threats, and also opportunities if we consider, for example, the benefits of clean energy. And there is need for integrating water management and disaster risk reduction within a framework of climate change risk and also climate variability, because in Africa, we have even vulnerabilities regarding climate variability and not only climate change, but this is highly exacerbated by climate change.
Oh,
and
thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, especially because I'm looking forward to seeing what your solutions look like and where you would ideally like us to see in the next round of questions. Okay. But I think you've raised such an important point about the amplifying effects of climate change. I think this year we've seen with COVID-19 in terms of an external stressor that is quite comprehensive, that just seems to amplify already so many of the issues that are underlying in society. So if we don't take steps to engage with climate change in an appropriate time frame, I think that was such an important point that you raised, we could see many more of these kinds of disasters in the futures and even more amplification of the societal stresses that we have. Mr. Prisset, could you give us a little bit of insight of where you think we are at the moment with Africa's challenges and opportunities?
Thank you very much. And perhaps I should have said it at the onset. I'm currently working within the MENA North Africa division. So I'm currently responsible for North Africa. I just wanted to put this straight. So thank you again. Yes, from our side, I think we believe that the factors are multifold and essentially man-made when it comes to what are challenges in Africa. So as one of the other panelists had just said, Africa is a land of opportunities. There's a dynamic youth population which deserves better consideration and recognition of its potential for sustainable transformation. And as mentioned as well, I think to me, that's what the reason why I mentioned Aspiration 4, There cannot be social development, economic development without peace, without addressing and tackling grievances, governance, rule of law, and human rights. So I believe we need to strive towards pluralist and democratic societies, which puts people and youth at the center and promotes self-determination, human development, creativity, innovation, and equal opportunities for all. Mostly, I think that our intervention, which again needs to be context-specific, need to address aspiration of young people, including participation in policy processes. When it comes to the overall challenges, as I said, they are multifold. I mean, first of all, there is the fact that we have millions of young people that are actually working in the informal sector, basically meaning precarious employment, and particularly young women are especially vulnerable. And by precarious employment, I mean those people still end up with no decent job opportunities. That means unskilled work, and with perhaps the temptation of migrating elsewhere for a better life. So I think that's important to reset this into the context. And the formal private sector will only be able to make a small contribution to reducing youth unemployment in Africa because of governance issues and lack of infrastructure. So if without any major advances in grid technology, the private sector in Africa were to grow quickly and in an ideal way that resulted in millions of jobs being created within a short space of time, we would rapidly reach the limit of our planet's resources. So we have to be realistic. It's unrealistic to view that only the private sectors as Africa's panacea over the next 20 years. We need new approaches, new innovations, and the informal sectors. We have also the challenges of the globalization, which have not permeated through the poorest section of society in Africa. So I think that's also very important. Structural and global governance factors are the main issues. This was mentioned earlier: bad governance, corruptions, conflicts, chronic fragility, climate change was mentioned, also represents exacerbating factors. Many national governments do not share dividends of wealth equally, or are not working for the good of the people. I want to mention also one thing which it's tend to take a more and more importance in the narrative, which is the global security agenda. Countering violent extremism has become a global priority. Even though, I mean, their one line of thought currently pervading international policy dialogue is that decent work or prospect for young people cannot prevent radicalization. This is not completely true. When measured to improve the prospect of young people are considered purely from a security perspective. We need also, with the risk of drawing conclusions that are too outside-centric. So I wanted to mention that because there's increasing push to consider security, but I think we have also to be careful of what we mean by security and what are the factors and actually for what consequences. So this might sometimes has been used, too often been used as an instrument, indeed, just to shut down and silence democracy. So I think we have to be also cognizant of that. So I'll stop it there when it comes to the challenges. And yet one more point is that international donors, and I think we are, as DC, certainly part of this community, tend to overestimate the external drivers of change, while we underestimate the importance of change from within. And I think that's also the challenge that we need to look at, is that change from within takes time and political determination, which gets me back to the point that I said earlier about governance. This is the key to unlock a better future. So again, we are here to help, but I think change needs to come from within. And finally, on the challenges, I would just make another point, is the, yes, I think I'll stop in here for now. I'll talk about some sort of angle, lenses, approaches in Africa when it comes to particularly education. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Mr. Prisset, I feel like you really captured what a lot of the attendees are feeling as well. So whilst you were speaking, there was a poll that was going around that asked people, what aspiration do you think African decisions makers need to focus more on? And they aligned, the majority of our attendees, well, quite narrowly aligned with you on aspiration 3, an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law. And that was the top choice from our participants today. So I think that you really hit the nail on the head, that that's something that we need to focus on, and that's a challenge that people are really feeling on a daily basis. Ms. Naz, could you please come through with what you think your challenges are?
Yes, thank you very much. I will not repeat what the previous speakers have said, because I really agree with all the points that were made in terms of challenges. I will pick up from where Mr. Preset left, which is change coming from within. What the crisis has shown us is that by having global value chains spreading all over the world, countries are just putting themselves in a very vulnerable situation. And this is globally, but more importantly for Africa, because this crisis is coming on the demand side and on the supply side. In terms of supply, meaning that not having access to inputs coming from overseas has prevented the private sector and companies in Africa to continue their production process and continue being on the market. Same thing inside, where because of lockdown, people have not been really focusing on any consumption or buying or purchasing anything. Also, in terms of the African continent, the countries are too much relying on raw materials and commodities. And we have seen with the crisis that the price of these commodities have gone down and plummeted, again, because of the supply-demand issue and the fact that with lockdown, there hasn't been exchange. So you see all the points of fragility of the African continent. And this is where I think the change should come from within. This is a young continent. This is a continent that is on the path of growth, despite the crisis, despite the debt that the countries are facing, despite many economic issues and infrastructure issues and social issues. This is a continent that is on the path of growth, and that growth should be benefiting and taken advantage of by the countries in Africa. So this is where we need to rethink the development model, and we need to try and see what is the continent offering for the continent itself to overcome the challenges we have seen. In terms of the challenges, I would like to also speak more specifically about women, because we talked about the informal sector that has been the first hit by the crisis, and we know most women are actually in the informal sector. But there is also the aspect that this crisis has touched sectors that women are the majority in, such as the personal services sector, such as the textile and clothing sector, the hospitality sector. So we have to make that distinction, learn from this crisis how to adapt the response to where vulnerability exists and where the vulnerable groups can be impacted even more than others to achieve this wish of no one being left behind. And then the other limitation that women faced, and I finish with this point, is the fact that women have multiple roles in the family, and this has been ignored in general. So when the crisis hit, women found themselves having to stay home to take care of the kids, having to be the professor, the teacher, and educate the kids, and at the same time bring in an income. So that's, again, another thing that we need to consider when we are looking at response. And I think that response definitely should come from within the continent to be able to serve the continent. Thank you very much. I will come later.
Thank you very much. That is such a wonderful insight that you brought in, particularly bringing in the gender lens. I think it's quite interesting in the way that often policies are worded in terms of like women's issues or youth issues, as though I think women exist as like a separate part of society, but like taking into account everything that you said and the fact that women for the most part account for nearly 50% of the population, when we don't deal with the issues that women face on a daily basis, we're leaving out half of the population. And I think that that's like such a critical thing in terms of the way that we respond to the vulnerabilities and the ways in which crisis can impact those who are more vulnerable than others. But then I guess this comes to the part where we can have a little bit more hope in terms of starting to think about and vision where is it that we'd like to be. So I'm mindful of time, and I'd really like to find ways that we can integrate the exciting audience that we have, the other 252 participants that we have on the call with us. So I'm going to collapse the last two questions into one and say, where is it that we would like to be in the future? And what do we think are maybe two interventions that can help us get there? And then I'll start again with Ms. Hima. So where is it that we'd like to see ourselves in the future? And what are 2 interventions that we think will allow us to get there? It's about 2 minutes each per person.
Thank you very much again for the floor. 2 minutes is very, very short, but I will try to lump some of my responses. I think first and foremost, Africa must begin to trade with itself. I think this past year, them and ensure that Africa becomes one in that manner. The second point I would like to focus on, which has been made by many participants here, is that really nothing would be possible without better governance. We have seen recently what has happened in Nigeria, neighboring Nigeria, with the EndSARS movement, where young people and by young people, by young women also, came and asked, demanded that better governance, demanded accountability for what is happening in their countries. And I believe that this is a trend that we might see more and more of on the African continent if we do not deliver on governance. Governance is critical, governance will be key. And the third aspect that I would like to focus, that I think is room for growth is the area of hope. Security is paramount, is critical. I've spoken about the Sahel region where I am from, where the security situation really disproportionately affects young people. We've seen how groups like Boko Haram kidnap young women in masses, recruiting young men who sometimes join them because of lack of economic opportunities, or they are lured by easy gain. So I think security is paramount, is critical, and it also impacts on access to other critical resources, such as access to education as well. I think earlier on, Hatim was talking about some of the work that I did with the Security Council, which was to look at how to ensure the continuation of education, even in the most difficult context. We've seen within a year, over, I think 500,000 children's education had been affected by conflict in 3 countries of the Sahel. And we can only imagine how this could be exacerbated if we don't do more to ensure that security is there for our people. And the last point, I know I've only had 2 minutes, is as Ms. Liliana said, is that this development has to be inclusive. And for me, when I say inclusive, I mean inclusive of all groups, but also inclusive of women. And I am a young woman is going to move forward with us. We cannot, on major tables of decision-making, 90% of them are men or no women at all. The prerequisite number of women.
I think the last point that you were making was the importance of integrating women in the decision-making process at the tables where these decisions are being made, and also in thinking about how these decisions will impact women in the future. Does that capture your last point?
It does, really. We have to invest in women, in young women. When we look at even access to education in rural areas, women, young girls trail behind young boys. When we look at the workforce in African countries, we don't have enough women. Yet we cannot possibly develop our continent if half of the population is left behind. It's a matter of justice, but it's also a matter of economic sound thinking. So this is where I will end my point, and I would really like to thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Those points have been incredibly insightful. I'm just going to go over now to Mr. Preset. What is your vision, at least one thing that you think of is a place that we should ideally hope to be as a continent, and a step or 2 steps that you think would get us closer to that?
Thank you very much. And well, boy, I mean, there's going to be probably many that I would like just to say. But I think I'd like to build up on what the previous distinguished speakers, as I said, is basically change starts now and starts at school. So I believe that today's children will be tomorrow's deciders and entrepreneurs. So I think, again, this is an extremely important point. The future generation are now, and I think we need to look at them now. So for me, what I would say is just we need to transform education so that young people get connected with the world of work, lifelong learning, and ensure the link between formal education and work, and promote vocational training. When is it possible? The reason is that, and this is also one of the axes of intervention of SDC, is that we believe that these are two sides of the medal. There cannot be education without access to work or without just proper training, or there cannot be vocational training that complements education, formal education. So I think this is, to me, very important. We need to promote education as means of enhancing social cohesion, conflict transformation, economic empowerment, including women, resilience, and sustainable development. And I think for me, these are key issues where I think we can basically, looking at the lenses of governance, we need to tackle. And it's a long-term endeavor, but I think this is for me very important. Again, whether we look at governance, human rights, rule of law, it starts with educating. Whatever that is, it is for me, that's it. So I will not just be longer, but I think to me, and I think again, this has been one of the actions of intervention for Switzerland, for the SDC, really trying to focus on education. And it's not a vain word. It's absolutely the keys that unlock everything. We need just to put the money where the mouth is. We need just to get the energy over there, education. And again, from a gender equality perspective, absolutely, and I absolutely subscribe to what the previous speakers have said. I'll stop in here for now.
Awesome, thank you so much, and thank you for trying to fit so much into like such a small time frame. Dr. Driewacht, can you please let us know what you think, particularly in terms of climate change, is the key issue where, or at least like the ideal version for Africa that you'd like to see, and a step that we can take, or two steps that we can take that will get us closer to that vision?
Okay, yeah, just to, based on what has been discussed just before, I would like to say that it is important also to encourage the contribution of women in climate sciences. And in terms of where do we want to go related to the climate change challenge, we need to limit climate change related risks and bolster resilient development. And there is need, I think, there is need for increased efforts in all the parts of the puzzle, including teaching, research, far-sighted development policies that take into account the different challenges, including the climate change. But one aspect I would like to arise here, because we, as I have said, there is need for more efforts in several parts, in several sides of the puzzle, if I may say like this. So one aspect I would like to arise is related to the data and information access, all kinds of information, environmental information, information on water, agriculture, etc., to support research. We need more science, more research in the continent. So we need to encourage this and to make available data for researchers, for students. And I am sure we have here students that are familiar with the problem of information and data access, which limits their progress in terms of research and science development. And this is important in my point of view for supporting risk management and reduction in Africa. Our region is among the regions which suffers the most regarding this aspect of data availability and access, with negative impacts on the progress, on socioeconomic development, scientific, etc. For example, for the climate aspect, we cannot manage appropriately a climate-dependent system. And we know how many are they, these climate-dependent systems, without accurate information about where we are, climate monitoring, and where we are going, so the future, and also how do we get there. So there is need for more available and usable climate information to inform decision making. And Africa has the least developed land-based observation network, as stated in the WMO report on the state of climate in Africa in 2019. So we have only 1/8 of the minimum density required by WMO, and this despite the fact that Africa is one of the regions receiving the highest share of climate adaptation funding. So gaps still remain in various components in the climate information and service value chain, which is very important for risk reduction and climate change adaptation and also mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's such a useful insight in terms of like, without the correct information, it's not possible to make the correct policies. And it links in really well, I think, with like the three kind of strands that I'm pulling together from this is that so far we need education, we need to invest in the human capital of people, we need to focus on security and ensure that the conditions are available for people to pursue education, development, and growth. We need to include women in the process of how these decisions get made and in terms of what decisions we hope to make. And we also need to make sure that the information that we're getting filters through to the decision makers and allows us to make an effective stand when it comes to issues of climate change. And so I'm going to leave it with you, Ms. Nas, in terms of giving us what you think are the last things that can add to that, I guess, I'm not sure what a trifecta with 4 is, but to those 4 really strong points that the other panelists have brought up so far.
Yes, thank you very much. You give me the challenge of being the last. Anyway, I wanted to say, maybe to add to what the other speakers have said, and really coming from more maybe from an economic perspective or trade perspective, even though I totally agree with all the points that were made, especially in terms of education, in terms of security, in terms of silencing the guns as where we started. But coming back to more the economic side, I think one of the things that the crisis has really exposed and shown in a strong manner is the fact that we are going to be more technology driven and more digital. So this is something, and actually most of the small businesses or micro businesses in Africa, they have been, in many countries, they have been quick and fast to shift from traditional business to more digitally based business, because this was a question of survival. So for me, one of the initiatives or one of the things that need to happen is really to generalize access to the internet and build the skills to be able to use it effectively to empower people economically. So not just to open it for business, but to open it for education, to open it for access to financing, to open it for investment and everything. And this has to be an effort from the government, but also from the private sector to make that infrastructure available and accessible at a reasonable cost. That is one aspect. The second aspect, in my view, is the change that we are seeing now in supply chains and countries, all major countries talking about nearshoring, meaning bringing back the supply chain closer to the market. If we speak about the African Continental Free Trade Area and what Ali Matou said in terms of countries need to trade with each other, this is the starting point. How do we bring back the supply chains to Africa to service Africa? How do we start collecting information on which supply chains need to be connected together, and how countries can actually open their borders and open the infrastructure and set up the infrastructure to make these supply chains happen. And in the same area, maybe when we set up these supply chains, really to look at the green investment and green production, and not duplicate the existing growth model, which doesn't work anymore. We cannot have a model that overuses our own natural resources. We have to come with a new model, and this is the time. having the continental free trade area, having this openness in the African continent, having almost a clean slate, not really a clean slate, but still more or less open possibility to really rethink the growth model. And the last point I wanted to mention is that in the UN, we have the Agenda 2030, and maybe the 2030 can serve as the driving line as well to achieve the 2063. This is what we believe. Let's work on the 2030 because it is closer in date, excuse me, and it can help us actually be the stepping stone for achieving the 2063. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. I think you had such a hard task, but you really added in something that we hadn't spoken about before and that we hadn't really integrated into it, is just the importance of the digital and equipping people for the digital space, as well as the opportunity that's provided to rethink supply chains, to rethink economic models in a way that we wouldn't have had if things had stayed the way that they were in 2019. So on the digital, I'm going to open up the floor for questions. But because of the time constraints, if you have a question and you're part of the participants, could you type it up in the Q&A box? I know that the time isn't as long as we'd initially hoped for, but if you could please just type your questions in the Q&A box, and then I will ask them directly to the panelists. So please, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We have 6 people who've raised their hands so far.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. I want to say a big thank you to the panelists and the moderator for this wonderful presentation and their contribution to the topic. Most of the panelists spoke extensively about education and the need for quality education. But we've seen that throughout the pandemic, since it started, Africa has seen a major setback in our education due to the closing of the schools. So my question is, how best is it that our leaders can change or bring in a new educational model that can cater for the needs of Africans? For we see that in many African countries, we have inherited the educational system of those that colonized us. How best do you think we can change the educational system to best cater for our African issues? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's such an excellent question. Ms. Hima, because I can see your head nodding and you're taking notes, would you like to take a stab at that question?
Yes, thank you so much, Fatoumata Jarvi. I don't know where you're from, but thank you for this very important question. As you've mentioned, there has been a setback with the global pandemic. It is, I think they would say, the largest shutdown of schools for all children around the world. So all children worldwide, you're from the Gambia, so very nice to meet you, have been affected. But I think going back to something that had been said earlier, one of the fundamental differences between children in so-called developed countries, that have managed to maintain a certain level of learning, and children in our African countries is that the digital education is simply not developed at all. I think even in capital cities, access to digitization is very limited, let alone rural areas where we know in a majority of African countries live in rural areas. So I think we need to leapfrog in the same way I believe African countries have jumped from, going past fixed phones to cell phones, connectivity. We need to do something similar for education, ensuring that digital education is accessible and is reliable to all people. I think quickly, one initiative that I would like to speak to is something that is being tried in Niger. It is in its infancy, but I think something like that, if it can work, would really be effective, is the smart villages, Village Intelligent, which basically looks to make of schools the hub for connecting communities, including rural areas. You bring connectivity to a school and it can really change everything. So I completely agree with you. We need to rethink our educational systems. In the type of educational systems, the curriculum needs to change. It's too old style in a lot of countries. There is a huge divide between children who manage to go to private schools and the majority who go to public schools. We still operate in the old system that hasn't changed in some countries in over 20 years. So I agree with you. This can be a very, very long discussion. It's actually the topic of my ongoing doctoral dissertation. So happy to discuss offline further. I don't want to take the floor for too long.
Thank you so much, Halimatu. The question that we have from the Q&A side, because there's a lot of questions on education, but Jafet Gael Mavokungu brought up a question that many Africans do not trust products made in Africa. What do you think the key action should be to promote trust in Africa-made products so that Africa trades more with itself? Ms. Naz, would you be interested in taking that question?
Yes, sure. I can try at least. Of course, I mean, we know that for people to have trust in products, they have to go through a quality control and ensure that they are safe, secure, and of good quality for consumers. That brings us back to the question of governance and rule of law. I think we need to have very strong, countries need to have strong trade policies, but more importantly, because the policies exist, more importantly is really to apply those policies and make sure that the products actually meet the requirements in terms of standards, in terms of quality, in terms of safety for the consumers. And this has to be built on over a period of time through the years. So if we don't have that sense of being able to trust the product, it's very difficult for countries to trade with each other. Thank you. And actually the bad example hurts all the others, because we have very good products on the continent that are traded across countries. But unfortunately, if only one product does not go through strict and true control to be safe, then it hurts the image of all other products that are traded on the government. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's such an insightful answer into the kind of back end of products and trade that we don't often think about when we're thinking about increasing trade across countries. Awesome. Okay, so then whilst we're waiting for people to put their hands up for microphone questions, there's a really interesting question that's come in from Nael Kader, and it says, "Hey guys, I'm loving this talk really. I'm curious, however, when we discuss development in the region on all scales and factors related, are we following the same approaches or are we looking for a paradigm shift? By paradigm shift, I mean the way we do development. Are we still constrained by the ways that donors like to function?" And so I think that's a really interesting question. And I think Mr. Preset, as the representative of the donors in this room, would you be interested in taking that question?
Yeah, thank you very much. And, indeed, they're very, very good, interesting questions. I think I'm not sure if I mentioned at the onset, but you're right. I think this is a good point. I think we want to make sure that the international community is part of the solution and not part of the solution and part of the problem, obviously. So I think it's very important that, and I think it's, again, it's a two-way conversation. We need, there is currently a lack of credible, sustainable planning only, on the part of the partner country governments, but also on the global international community, international cooperation. So I think that's very important. As to the model, I think the ideal world would be not come with some sort of top-down approach, but rather to use national systems. So these are the systems that need to be updated and improved. I mean, we have no interest in exporting a model. When I was mentioning earlier about linking education and vocational training, yes, we do have some very good experiences in West Africa, in North Africa, when it comes to trying to unlock and to work on this some sort of this vocational training, skills development versus education. But it doesn't mean that it has to be exporting a Swiss model or any other model. I would really insist that, again, we here to support changes within, and we need to support changing national systems, improve systems, governance, educational systems. And I think for me, that's the key point. And it's a matter of investing. For me, clearly, with always, what is the percentage of the education budget within the government budget? It's always too low. So I think there should be some sort of a multifold, push to make sure that actually a budget for education is increased substantially to address some of the shortcomings that they've been mentioned earlier. So yes, it is not about exporting a model, but it's about supporting a model that needs to be updated. This is what I would call, quote unquote, a paradigm shift.
Thank you so much. And that definitely does sound like something that's quite different from, I guess, Africa's history with developmental aid. So it's quite exciting that from the donor perspective, you're also looking at shifting the paradigm and the way that relations have been traditionally. Hatim, could you please pull up some of the people who've raised their hands?
Absolutely. So we have Hajar Harda. So Hajar, I will activate your microphone.
Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. So we can hear you.
Can everyone hear me?
If you can just speak up, Hajar, that will be great.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Hajar. I'm from Morocco, and thank you so much for the panelists for such a great conversation. So I've gathered like so many great points that you've talked about, but in reality, when we think about Africa today, we know that Africa is not underdeveloped, it is overexploited. And we're still, even when we gain independence, there are so many countries that are still under the rule of colonialism and other more powerful countries. So when we think about education and, you know, women's rights and climate change and all of that, I would like to know the panelist's view on like what would be the realistic first step, even under the more powerful colonial rule in Africa and overexploited power. What would be the most important step if we have to start from within, and if we have to start now, what would be the first step as Africans to do in order to ensure a more stable Africa?
That is a challenging question. And so because it's so challenging, I'm not going to assign it to any one of the speakers on the panel. So if there's one of the panelists who feels like this resonates with them, please do go ahead and answer.
I think I can take a quick stab at Hajar's question. It is a big question. I think in a lot of sectors, including education, we need to decolonize the way we do things. I think there's been a huge movement run out of South Africa, you know, on decolonizing the academy, which is important. When we talk about science, I think Dr. Fatima has talked about it. Decolonizing science also has to do with investing more in science. I think historically, a lot of African countries have not invested significantly in it. And when we look at today's global context, we are all looking to scientists to give us an answer in terms of what needs to be done with the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, the virus itself, the pandemic, yes, there are a lot of entities working on it, but the virus itself. So Africa also needs to be at the forefront. So this is just one specific example. Now, in terms of, looking at your overall question, I think, again, I'll go back to this Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which when it becomes operational, is going to be a single market of over 1.2 billion people. And our cumulative GDP would be up to 3 trillion. I think that is a start. Economic power and economic might is incredibly important. And I think a lot of other parts of the world have understood it, which is why we've seen the European Union come together, create a huge single market. China is powerful because of its economy. And I also believe that yes, Africa is well integrated in global markets, but it's going to be even more powerful when we become a stronger economic power. So I think that is where it starts. Let's expand our economy, and then with that would also expand our voices on major tables of decision making. I think it's clear to all of us today that the global multilateral systems also need to change to reflect African perspectives a bit more, and I think that will come with our stronger economic power on the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was such a thorough answer to the question. Hatim, is there somebody else who has raised their hands?
Yeah, so we have Ahmadou Yaya. I'm not sure if I activate his microphone. So Ahmed Yaya,
Yeah, hello.
Perfect. Yeah, if you can just be brief, so we can take some Q&A.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I would like to dwell more on. My question goes, I think, around the fourth item that was discussed, more of peace and secure Africa. That why is it that in Africa we have, when a civil war in Africa starts, it's always difficult for African leaders to come together in order to maybe address this issue and let it cease, given that we have the African Union, we have the ECOWAS, which are also bodies in Africa that look into African issues. So why is it that, why is it that they are unable to address address issues of security or issues of rioting, or when a civil war breaks, it takes time for it to be addressed? And how can they really do in order to, so that we can have this peaceful Africa that we are looking forward to? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's such a good question. Ms. Nas, can I ask you to answer that question with, even though it's slightly different from where your experience is, but with your experience of supranational groupings and the kind of complexity that gets them organized, would you be able to just give us some insight? So he asked, in terms of one of the challenges that we see on the continent is that when conflict does break out, it's quite difficult and quite slow for leaders from across the continent, and I guess maybe even from across the globe, to respond in a timely fashion and to come through with a coherent response. So what is it, I think the question that he asked was like, what is it that's stopping more active intervention on behalf of leaders from supranational bodies? I hope I captured that correctly.
Well, it's very difficult for me to answer the question because, you know, there are a lot of political interest and tensions, and, you know, the history. We were just talking about the historical background that impacts on Africa in general. So it's difficult to say how and why are we intervening fast or less rapidly in one region against another. We have seen the African Union take the lead in more recent conflicts, for instance, and I think this is when the solutions come. Again, we come back to the same aspect. When the solutions come from within and from an institution that is based on the continent and that is grouping the countries on the continent, I think it is probably more acceptable, quote unquote, but it can also have more positive effect if it is coming from within. So that is what I would say towards that question. Beyond that, I think it really depends on too many external and internal factors that is taken up on a case-by-case basis. So it is very difficult to give a general answer. I just wanted to say that, and this is coming from previous comments, that oftentimes we do not give enough attention to the economic aspect of things. But in my experience and professional experience, one day we had a meeting with high-level officials from the UN, and basically the way it was presented for the SDGs, the Agenda 2030, is that the economic SDGs like 8, 9, and others that talk about the production and employment and all of that are actually the ones that can help us achieve the other ones that are the more socially oriented. Because if you don't have the means to pay for the social policies and to put in place the infrastructure you need and all of that, then you are nowhere, basically. So we have to think a little bit more of how these two ends of the same spectrum interact together, and how the economic actually and more economic development can drive a better social equality and social development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was such a good answer and such a good balance to round up what we're talking, the ways in which a lot of these challenges and a lot of these solutions are interconnected. And as we step into more solutions, maybe from an economic space or from a governance space, that unlocks the potential to bring in more solutions in some of the other aspirations that we discussed earlier. So I think we have been, and I say thank you so much to the panelists who've been so generous with their time and staying with us for an extra 13 minutes. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your contributions to this discussion. You've really helped to I don't know, like like some very provocative and interesting points for debate. So thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciate that. And thank you so much also to the attendees in the audience. We really appreciate having you with us and the really vibrant chats that was going on the sidelines. It's been such a pleasure to be able to moderate this session and to discuss and to share with you. So thank you so much to everybody for coming through. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.